Combathletes all over the world, welcome to another installment. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, congratulations for finding us. If you're watching it in the Skool group, and even larger, congratulations for joining Combathletes Worldwide. Ultimately, the best combat sports community in the whole freaking world. That's my job. That's what I'm trying to do. Help as many of you combat athletes as possible with your strength and conditioning. My name's Coach Harry. I do hold the CSCS qualification. I am qualified to help as many of you as possible. And if you're not already following us on Instagram, at Combathlete Arena is where you want to go, because we're trying to give you as much free knowledge as possible to boost your combat sports performance. Okay, so what is the goal for this course then? Really simple, how to deal with injuries. Why? Because they are going to happen. It is pretty much a guarantee in your combat sports career at some point you are going to get injured. And thanks to your requests and in the Skool group, a lot of you guys were asking, can you give me some help on how to deal with injuries? Now, injuries are a really broad topic. There's obviously loads of different kinds of them. I'm going to give you a 3-step protocol today that I use with my combathletes, amateur, professional guys that are on their way to pro and in between, on how we do it and how we help them all over the world battle their way through the injury process with our 3-step protocol, which is really simple. So you're going to want to make yourself comfortable. Take some notes, because this stuff is really, really helpful. I wish I knew this stuff, 15, 20 years ago when I started on my own combat sports journey. Okay, so what is the protocol then? What do we use? 3 stages. Well, 4 if we include the middle section at 2B. So starting with diagnosis. We're going to talk about what is the diagnosis, who do we need to go and see to get one, and why is it important? Okay, you can't miss this stage. Most athletes miss this stage, and then they wonder why they're guessing with their rehab. Okay, so we're going to talk about the importance of that. Then we're going to talk about the rehab timeline. Okay, what is the timeline? What should we be doing? What are we aiming for during this period? It's not as complicated as you might think. We're going to talk about mindset. I get so many messages every week from guys and girls all around the world talking about, I've got this injury. What should I do? Everything's hopeless. My world is collapsing. I can't do the sport I love anymore. Blah, 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 blah. It's not as bad as you think. And we're going to talk about the power of reframing and how you can employ tricks of the mind, essentially, to help you on your rehab journey and fixing your injuries. And then we're going to talk about what does it look like to actually get back to combat sport? What are some useful tips and tricks to getting back to training? Okay, because a lot of people, they will rush this part, they'll jump straight back into training. Sometimes they re-injure themselves with the same injury again, which is frustrating. Okay, and that can be avoided with a few tips and tricks. So let's get stuck into it. Stage 1 then, the diagnosis. This is what I suggest. This is what I do with my athletes. Book in with a clinical physiotherapist as soon as possible, within hopefully 72 hours of doing the injury, preferably within 36 to 48 hours of doing the injury, maybe even the same day as the injury happening. Okay? Clinical physiotherapist. What does that mean? All right. Now, no disrespect to physios out there. It's similar to S&C in the sense that so many physios out there are rubbish. They are just crap. It's the same in S&C. There's so many crap coaches out there. Okay. So this is not to shit on all physios, but so many of them are rubbish. Okay. Clinical physiotherapists have been trained clinically to be able to provide diagnoses. Those are the people you need to seek out. We need a diagnosis. Why? We need to know what we've got. What are we starting with? What is the injury in question? If you don't know that, you are guessing. If you are guessing, your predictable timeline back to combat sport is blurry and ambiguous. Okay, we need to know. So the acute phase of injury, the immediate phase, as soon as you've done it, this is the time to get the diagnosis. Okay, so as soon as you're injured, get booked in. Hopefully, you have a physio already, in your contacts that you can call and book in with, or go online and book in with. If you're part of a gym, ask your training partners, who do you go and see when you get injured? They'll probably have a physio that you can go and see or talk to. Okay. If not, you might have to do some Googling and look in your area who's available, but they should be clinically trained, even better if they come recommended through other training partners and they are clinically trained. Even better than that, they've got some kind of understanding of S&C. Even better than that, they actually take part in combat sport themselves. So I'm going to give a big shout out to Mark Leyland back in the UK, Momentum Physio. Make sure you go and follow him on Instagram. The best physio I have ever worked with throughout my last basically more or less 10 years of being in coaching. He's absolutely fantastic. I have looked for good physios all over the world, wherever I've been. Mark is the best, okay? And once you find a good physio, you want to hang on to them for the rest of your combat sports career. You really do. So a good physio then, they will assess you and they will diagnose the injury. Now, what does assess mean? What are they going to do? They're going to do some testing on you to see what you've done, to get a clearer picture and a clearer understanding. When you get injured, it's important that you ask the physiotherapist, I would like you to test and assess me so that you can give me a diagnosis as to what my injury is. If they fluster at this and they're not quite sure what you mean, it's probably a huge red flag. And you need to go with someone who's like, yep, no problem. We'll take a look. We'll do some testing. Okay. Why? Testing is a more accurate way of understanding what the diagnosis is. Okay. So many combat athletes miss this stage because it's such a tough culture in combat sports. Very often, you've probably done this yourself if you're watching this. You get injured. You think, oh, I'll be all right. I'll give it a couple of days. And then it's kind of okay in a few days. And then, the downward spiral of negative effects happens. Either it comes back to haunt you at a later date, you redo the injury, like I said earlier, which is frustrating. You completely botch your rehab, and then when you're doing a competition or you're fighting, the same injury happens again, and now you've basically sacrificed your win or your victory in that match because of the injury. All these kind of things happen when athletes miss this stage of diagnosis. Now, physios are not gods either, okay? They're mere mortals. They may not be able to diagnose the injury without some kind of imaging, okay? MRI is usually the kind of gold standard, getting an MRI scan. The magnetic resonance imaging, I think it stands for, where it's basically you lying in a machine for 20 to 40 minutes whilst the machine scans through and sees what you've actually done objectively. Because some physios will misdiagnose, okay? They're only human. They should be able to test and get close, but some of them will misdiagnose. It's happened to me. I've gone in with injuries, thought that we were working on something, gone and got an MRI just to clarify. Turns out the diagnosis was wrong. It does happen, okay? MRIs, if you're not covered with insurance, can be expensive. You want to have a bit of money put to one side so that when injuries happen, if you want to get clear, objective understanding of what you've done, you can pay that money and go and get an MRI. You can get a requisition or the doctor to kind of refer you to the MRI center and get the scan done, and then you know what you're dealing with. Okay, so imaging really is the gold standard, but imaging plus physio equals a good diagnosis. So important that you start with understanding what you've done. What is the second stage then? The rehab timeline. So it's really about discussing the rehab timeline with your physiotherapist. Okay. How long are you going to be out of action for? It's the first thing usually we want to know. Once we've known what we've done as a combat athlete, the second area is how long am I going to be out of action for? When can I get back to training? Is it today? Is it tomorrow? Is it in 8 weeks, 12 weeks? Is it going to be next year? Okay. It varies depending on what you've done. A useful timeline from your physiotherapist will look something like this. Now, something is the key word here because it varies obviously depending on what your injury is, but something like this. Weeks 1 and 2, don't do any combat sport, okay? Just the rehabs. Week 3, reassess the injury site, begin some no resistance drilling. Now, arguably the biggest use for no resistance drilling in combat sport is the rehabilitation phase after an injury to test the injury site gently to see if it can handle the demands of the sport that are going to come later on. Okay. Week 4, increase the resistance, maybe start some positional kind of sparring. Okay. Jabs only, just leg kicks, half guard, take down entries, whatever it is. Just some kind of positional constraint or restraint. Weeks 5 and 6, increase the resistance during drills. Okay, so you get the idea. Everything's gradually building up here. Week 7, return to combat sports as normal. Okay, now obviously 7-week timeline, 12-week timeline, 12-month timeline. It will be dependent on what you've done. The point is there is a timeline and the physio should be able to plan this out with you. Okay, so that as you can start planning your training diaries basically and start figuring out your timelines of what it's going to take to get back to combat sport. So in a rehab timeline, what can you expect in terms of the rehab exercises? Okay. Usually the stages go something like this. I've rebuilt a few people over the last few years from surgeries, right, from bad injuries. These are the stages that we usually go through. It usually replicates something like this. And again, the physio will be the head authority here, but in conjunction with S&C, you can really speed up your results and get back faster. What's the first stage of rehab going to be then? It's usually going to be some very, very light isometric exercises or exercises that focus on restoring the range of motion at the area of injury. Okay, so if it's your shoulder, restoring the range of motion of your shoulder. If it's your knee, getting the range of motion of your knee back, etc. It's usually very light and very gentle, but quite frequent. Can be anywhere kind of 3 to 5 times a day you might be doing these exercises. Okay. Stage 2, something to look at the mobility and the stability of the injury site. Okay, now there's a whole subsect here that could be a whole nother series of presentations, but usually this just progresses on from restoring the range of motion to actually mobilize the area and stabilize the area. Stage 3 is what you're probably most familiar with some kind of rehab, is your strength endurance exercises, your 3 sets of 15, your 5 sets of 20, you know, very, very light weights. Sometimes you see the TheraBands, resistance bands, that kind of thing. That's to improve the endurance capacity of the muscles surrounding the injury site. Okay. Strength is where it gets a bit more fun. If you're a personality like me, at least you can actually now work on strengthening the area, stage 4. And then stage 5, a bit more kinesis introduced, strength and power, which is shortly followed by a return to combat sport if the strength and power phase goes well. And it's always a good idea to test the injury site in the weight room before you go and test it in a setting that really counts under pressure in combat sport. Okay, so what is it important to understand? That physiotherapists and strength and conditioning coaches can work together for the best outcomes. Okay, all my guys that I work with, they'll hear me barking on about what we call indications and contraindications, i.e. do's and don'ts as per the physio's recommendations. If you work with the physio and the athlete, you know, all together, or if you're the athlete watching and you work with your S&C coach and your physiotherapist and you work together as a triangle, you'll get much, much better results. Another thing that we do all the time when it relates to single limb injuries, okay, so like a shoulder, an elbow, a knee, etc., is mirroring. Okay, mirroring can speed up the healing process. There's loads of other protocols we use in rehab, but this is really, really cool and it's worth researching. There's been quite a few studies done on this. Essentially, let's say I hurt my right arm, okay? I want to restore the ability to be able to press my right arm overhead. Mirroring in the rehab timeline around the strength phase would include me pressing, let's say, a 2.5 pound weight with my right hand, at the same time of pressing a 40 pound weight with the healthy left side. And whilst I'm doing this, my brain is teaching the right side to heal faster, to restore that movement pattern faster, because I'm mirroring it in conjunction with the healthy side. Okay, that's a really oversimplified way that we use it, but mirroring is really worth looking into, guys, and talking to your physio about if you have a single limb injury. It's really, really cool. I've done it on both AC joints, I've done it through my knees, I've done it with loads of injuries in the past. It's really, really cool. So that was just a little adjunct I wanted to throw in there. All right, stabilizing the joint then. What else can we do along the rehab timelines? So in my opinion, okay, this is just my opinion, structural taping is the GOAT, okay? What is structural taping? This is basically using cloth tape, cotton tape. Hockey tape is the standard here in the North Americas because it's just a cheaper version, but basically cloth-based tape that works as an exoskeleton to support your joints, okay? If you can see the background image on this slide here, it's of an athlete's knee being taped up with, you know, structural taping methods. Not the same as kinesio tape. Okay, the literature on kinesio tape suggests that the placebo of it is the only good part, and even that is a bit flimsy. I'm never going to knock a placebo, but structural taping, the reason why I like structural taping specifically is because it is an exoskeleton on the joint. Okay, I've used this again, started in my rugby career as a youngster, but has carried through into combat sports. This is so helpful for stabilizing a joint when it's still healing and still coming back, and perhaps you're back to positional sparring, you don't want to re-blow the elbow, but you can do some structural taping on it and support it to give it that helping hand, okay? So structural taping is well worth looking into. Again, athletes that work with me, I often send them structural taping resources so that they can tape up their joints. Usually you can do this on your own as well. It's very low cost, very, very helpful, guys, on your rehab timeline. Another thing that's worth investing in then, a set of neoprene, knee and elbow sleeves, lifting sleeves basically, lifting knee sleeves, lifting elbow sleeves. They're reusable, they're washable. You can wear them on top of taping, on top of structural taping for added support. And really powerful, but very often underlooked, it signals to your training partners that you may have an injury in that area. If I come into a grappling session or a striking session and I've got an elbow sleeve on that you haven't seen me wearing before, it's very easy for me to start a conversation if you're sparring with me or about to do some positional work, and I say, hey, listen, mate, I'm just coming back from an elbow injury. I appreciate it if, you didn't try and armbar me on this arm today, right? Or you didn't try and make me overreach on my punches on this arm today, or whatever it is. I can signal to my partner that that area is coming back from injury and is healing because it's got that sleeve on it. Okay, so you can pick these up on Amazon now for 20, 30 bucks, well worth investing in as part of your gym bag, and then, your injury and your return to combat sports kit. Let's talk about mindset then. In the last 2 weeks alone, at the time of recording this, I've had 3 conversations with athletes all about mindset that I work with because of what's happened to them. They've had injuries and their mental side of things is really suffering because of the injury. And I totally get it. Every time I get injured, I still get bummed out. Okay, but there's a few things we can do to help with the mindset so that the healing process is, it may never be enjoyable, but we want it to be tolerable. We don't want to get depressed, right? We don't want to get downhearted. We don't want to lose our confidence. We want to do things that can at least help us along the timeline for recovery so that our mindset's in the right place, okay? It's a huge struggle for athletes having a positive mindset when there's an injury. They're almost, juxtaposed, or they're two different ends of the spectrum, right? So as soon as you're diagnosed, here's what you want to start thinking about. You want to start reframing the injury. Okay, let's take the elbow as another example then. Let's continue with that. I've hurt my elbow. Okay, it got popped in an armbar. I can't straighten my arm now. I can't flex my arm. It's very, very sore. I might have done some ligament damage inside the elbow joint. But if I reframe that, okay, the right arm is injured, but what can I do sensibly today? Okay, well, my left arm is good, isn't it? Both of my legs are good. So, 3/4 of the rest of my body, my neck is good, is fine. So perhaps on this rehab timeline, I could actually be working around the elbow joint relatively normally as I rehab the actual injury site itself localized to the elbow. Could probably go for a walk. If I've hurt my lower body, chin-ups are probably on the cards then, aren't they? Upper body pulls and pushes. If I've hurt my shoulder, can I still do grip exercises? There's always something you can do. And that is the power of reframing, okay? Yes, injuries suck. Yes, you have to be sensible, but it doesn't mean the end of the world. Too often athletes get caught up in the identity crisis of being injured and not being able to do their combat sport. And then there's some kind of depression carryover from that because they're not reframing what they can do. They're only looking at what they can't do. So it's really, really important that you reframe the injury into the positive and start thinking about not only the rehab timeline that you're going to discuss with your physio, but also your lifestyle timeline of what you can do to work around it. Very, very powerful, very, very important. Again, could be a whole presentation just on that idea alone. We use it all the time. Okay, returning to combat sport then. This is the last kind of phase on the rehab journey. Here's some useful principles for you, okay? If you test, we talked about that kind of stage 5, or the last stage on your rehab timeline is performing more kinetic exercises, strength and power work in the weight room on the injury site first before we go and test it. Good example with the elbow. Can I do quick concentric bicep curls or slow eccentric bicep curls, perhaps on the rings, perhaps lowering myself from chin-ups before I go back to grappling sparring and test, someone putting me in an accidental arm bar or putting me in an arm bar where they extend a bit too far and then me finding out, oh, elbow's not ready. I can find that out in the weight room. Is my elbow ready with more kinetic exercises? Okay. And again, a good S&C coach will be able to point you in that direction as part of your, post-rehabilitative timeline. Okay. Communicate with your training partners about your injury. I mean, this is so obvious, but it's amazing how many people don't even talk to their training partners. They re-hurt themselves and then they get annoyed, and then the training partner's devastated to find out it was an old injury and that they never talked to them about it. They just went into sparring, everything seemed normal, and then next thing you know, you feel guilty because you popped your mate's elbow, but your mate didn't tell you that was already injured. Okay, so you've got to communicate with your training partners. It's as simple as just saying before you begin any kind of training, hey mate, I'm just coming back from an injury here. Would you mind just, be mindful of it? Something like that, okay? It's your responsibility if you're injured to bring that up. And then like we talked about earlier, wearing elbow sleeves, knee sleeves, taping, some kind of structural taping to signal where the injury site was. Okay, because then if you bring it up with your partner and there's also some visual cue for your partner to see, if your partner then goes overboard and hurts you, now there's a better conversation to be having about, hey, I think that was a bit out of line, like I did bring this up, or whatever it is. Okay, you did your part. Okay, so take responsibility for that. Hope this was helpful. This is a very simplified crash course on dealing with injuries, but hopefully there's some useful points in there for you. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below on the YouTube video. That's absolutely fine. Or if you're in the Skool group, ask away in the comments section. Share it with one of your training partners. Perhaps there's someone you know who's injured right now. They might be suffering with the mindset side of things. They might be, confused on what should I do? Should I go to a physio? Should I go to the hospital? Should I go and see a chiropractor? What should the process be? Send it to them. It might help them. And please let me know if you like this so I can make more content. Make sure you join Combathletes Worldwide then. It's a free Skool community. The link will be in the description on the YouTube video. You get to book a free performance call with me as part of joining that group, because I do believe a good coach can change the trajectory of a combat athlete's future career just with a 10 to 15 minute phone call. And I'm offering those phone calls for free for you to help you with your strength and conditioning for your combat sports performance. So join the Skool group. You can book a free call with me there in your inbox when you join. You'll get all the links for that. Follow at Combathlete Arena on Instagram. And again, guys, you're always welcome to ask me messages in the DMs or ask me questions in the DMs. Send me messages if you've got any questions. There's anything that you're stuck on with your strength and conditioning, any struggles, any obstacles, just drop me a message. I'll do my best to try and help you and try and answer if I can. And if I can't, I'll try and point you in the right direction. My name's Coach Harry. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you on the next one.